On the afternoon of August 29, 2000, the Ventura Police Department in California received an intriguing 911 call from an unidentified woman. Detective Matt Harville took the call and quickly realized that the caller had information regarding a crime that had occurred 7 years prior. She revealed that she possessed knowledge about the identity of the murderer responsible for a woman's death in 1993. Although she was initially reluctant to share, Detective Harville's calm demeanor and professionalism helped her to confide in him, providing a wealth of details about the case. The name she disclosed was Michael Schultz, the man who had committed the heinous act. He had brutally murdered the victim, disposed of her body in a bathtub filled with chemicals, and subsequently set the apartment ablaze. The woman recounted the chilling specifics of the crime, including the lengths to which the killer went to obliterate any trace of his actions. However, Detective Harville was unfamiliar with this particular case. Was this woman revealing crucial information about a long, cold murder, or was it merely a deceptive prank? To uncover the truth, Detective Harville delved into the database of homicide cases, searching for a victim named Cynthia Berger. He soon discovered the cold case of Cynthia Berger, who had been assaulted and murdered on August 5, 1993, in her Port Hueneme home. After taking her life, the assailant attempted to destroy all evidence by igniting a fire in her residence. He also submerged Cynthia's body in bleach within her bathtub to eliminate any DNA traces. While the flames consumed much of the scene, remnants of his fluids survived the inferno and the bleach. Cynthia Berger, a 44-year-old car dealership manager, lived alone in a 2-story condo with a garage. When firefighters responded to the blaze, they discovered her lifeless body, naked and face down in the bathtub. The initial sign that this was not a mere accident, even prior to forensic analysis, was the alarming quantity of bleach discovered in the bathtub. The autopsy disclosed that she had been brutally assaulted and strangled. Detective Harville's investigation led him to reconnect with the officer who had been assigned to the case 7 years prior, Detective Dennis Fitzgerald. Harville reached out to Fitzgerald to delve deeper into the case, sharing details of an anonymous tip he had received. Upon hearing the information relayed by the caller, it became evident to him that they had likely identified the perpetrator. The moment Detective Fitzgerald heard the name Michael Schultz, his thoughts immediately focused on the individual who could potentially unlock the mystery surrounding Cynthia Berger's tragic demise. Notably, the authorities did not need to apprehend Schultz. He was already a convicted criminal, serving time in a High Sierra prison camp. The meticulous planning behind Cynthia's murder was evident. Her assailant had disabled the smoke detectors and fire alarm system before igniting her bed. Schultz had attempted to obliterate evidence by dousing her lifeless and violated body with bleach and other chemicals in the bathtub. Yet despite his efforts, vital biological evidence remained, preserved by the forensic team. As Detective Fitzgerald sought a breakthrough in this long-dormant case, an anonymous tipster ensnared Michael Schultz in the web of law enforcement for his nearly flawless crime. At the time of the murder, despite his criminal history, there was no substantial evidence linking him to the incident. Intriguingly, the anonymous informant turned out to be none other than his fiancée, Teresa Mooney. In a remarkable act of courage, she chose to prioritize justice over her love for him, coming forward to the authorities. For years, Michael Schultz had harbored the dark secret of his brutal assault and murder of Cynthia, but now the truth was poised to emerge. The confinement of Schultz in High Sierra prison was proving to be a significant hindrance as the specter of discovery loomed ever closer. Serving time for a series of burglaries and the assault of a police officer, his release was still a few months away. In a desperate bid for freedom, he implored Mooney to assist him in orchestrating an escape before fate intervened. This plea compelled him to recount the harrowing events of August 5, 1993, revealing the depths of his transgressions to her. Mooney was left reeling, grappling with the chilling reality of her fiancé's capacity for violence against another woman, a truth she had long kept hidden. In a moment of vulnerability, she confided in her daughter, sharing the burden of her secret. Alarmed by the implications of her mother's association with such a perilous individual, Her daughter insisted that Mooney report Schultz to the authorities, threatening to take matters into her own hands if she did not comply. Consequently, on August 20th, 2000, Mooney reached out to the Ventura Police Department, divulging every detail she possessed. Detective Fitzgerald dismissed any notion of a prank call, particularly when Mooney disclosed the use of bleach to obliterate evidence, information that was not publicly known and could only have been privy to the perpetrator or an accomplice. This revelation prompted the police to secure a warrant for a DNA sample from Schultz. Notably, Schultz had previously been apprehended during a botched burglary that bore striking similarities to the crime in question. The DNA results confirmed a match with a biological sample obtained from Cynthia, finally identifying a suspect in her cold case after 7 arduous years. Yet the investigation still sought to unravel the motive behind Schultz's calculated assault and murder of Cynthia Berger. The case of the People v. Schultz unfolded in the Ventura County Superior Court, with the DNA evidence firmly establishing Michael Schultz's guilt, leaving him with no avenue for escape. Detective Fitzgerald's findings indicated that the killer had resided in close proximity to Cynthia Berger's home at the time of her tragic demise. The police formulated a straightforward theory regarding Schultz's motive. He was a predatory burglar who discovered that Cynthia Berger resided alone. After observing her routine, he proceeded with the robbery, which escalated into her assault and tragic murder. This theory was further corroborated by his confessions to both Teresa Mooney and law enforcement. It was also disclosed that Schultz was under the influence of methamphetamine during the incident. The heinous nature of the crime, particularly the fire he left behind that posed a significant threat to neighboring homes, led the court to impose the death penalty. Schultz's legal team endeavored to overturn the death sentence, highlighting his methamphetamine use and the troubled childhood that shaped him. They also pointed out various legal discrepancies during the trial in hopes of securing a pardon from execution. In a desperate plea, Schultz himself appealed to the court for clemency. However, rather than swaying the court, his statements only reinforced their resolve. He claimed that he had assaulted and murdered Cynthia Berger as a means of exacting revenge on her family for a betrayal dating back to 1942. He asserted that he sought to inflict upon Mr. Berger the same anguish his own family endured when a relative betrayed 6 of his fellow Nazi soldiers to the U.S. Schultz expressed, "The rage and paranoid delusions I experienced, coupled with the amphetamines coursing through my veins, convinced me that the only way to avenge the executed soldiers was through what Mr. Berger cherished most, his daughter." This revelation marked the first instance of such a motive being articulated in this case. More significantly, the defendant read these words from a handwritten note, diminishing the impact of his claims regarding drug influence and a troubled upbringing. This clearly indicated that the assault and murder were not merely premeditated acts, but were also driven by deep-seated hatred. Schultz's legal representatives refrained from mounting any defense for their client following his statements. Intriguingly, Schultz identified the German soldier who betrayed his fellow troops as Ernest Berger. In a shocking turn of events, the Berger family disclosed that they had no ties to this soldier, rendering Cynthia's narrative even more tragic. On February 26, 2003, Schultz met his end in the lethal injection chamber of California, marking the conclusion of a harrowing chapter. The revival of Cynthia Berger's cold case invites a plethora of inquiries, yet offers scant clarity. What began as a burglary that escalated into an assault and murder gradually transformed into a hate crime linked to the tumultuous events of the Second World War. Notably, Michael Schultz only alluded to a Nazi connection during his appeal for clemency from the death penalty. His ability to disable smoke detectors and subsequently employ bleach to erase evidence suggests he was no ordinary thief. However, it was his insatiable desire that led to Cynthia's assault, ultimately his fate. While he confided in Teresa Mooney, he never acknowledged the murder as a hate crime. With the Bergers asserting their lack of connection to the German soldier Schultz despised, one is left to ponder whether this was merely a figment of his imagination or a case of mistaken identity. With Schultz now laid to rest, The truth behind these questions remains shrouded in enigma. On the fateful day of December 10, 1976, the 81-year-old World War I veteran, George Clarence Seitz, stepped out of his residence in Jamaica, Queens, with the simple intention of visiting a nearby barbershop for a haircut. In an instant, he vanished without a trace, leaving behind an enigma that would perplex those who knew him for decades. What fate befell him as he embarked on this seemingly innocuous errand? The answers to these haunting questions would elude discovery for an astonishing 40 years. Our narrative unfolds in Jamaica, a quaint neighborhood nestled within the vibrant borough of Queens, New York City. This locale is a tapestry of cultural diversity, embodying a rich authenticity that reflects its eclectic community. Among its residents was the solitary figure of George Clarence Seitz, affectionately known as Clarence. A valiant soldier in his youth, he dedicated his life to serving his country during the Great War. In the twilight of his years, he chose a life of solitude, shunning the limelight and opting for a private existence. Though outwardly it appeared that Seitz led a life of independence, shadows of complexity loomed over him. The harrowing experiences of war had etched deep scars upon his psyche, leaving him to grapple with severe post-traumatic stress disorder and an overwhelming sense of paranoia. His reclusive nature rendered him distrustful of others, and he often donned business attire as if preparing for a corporate engagement, only to wander the neighborhood instead. His aversion to banks was notable. He preferred to carry substantial amounts of cash, producing large rolls of bills when the occasion called for payment. Despite his withdrawn demeanor, Seitz adhered to a disciplined routine. His attire was always immaculate, his home meticulously organized, and his grooming impeccable, presenting an image of refined neatness. Yet on that ordinary day, no one could have foreseen that he would simply vanish while undertaking such a trivial task. At approximately 10 a.m. on that December morning, Seitz set out for the barber shop, a mere 2.5 blocks from his abode on 116th Street. That day, he would not return, nor did he come back the next day or the day after. He was never heard from again. 5 days after Seitz's mysterious disappearance, his family reported him missing. Though authorities began their search immediately, there was little to go on. He had left no clues behind, not a trace. Investigators could only speculate as to what could have happened. Deputies conducted several interviews in an attempt to gather information, but the leads were too thin. Authorities weren't even sure if he had made it to the barbershop. The case quickly turned cold. Over the years, the Queens County Sheriff's Office collaborated with the New York Police Department and Federal Bureau of Investigation, making numerous efforts to solve it, but they could never unravel the mystery. Finally, in March 2019, an unexpected breakthrough made the case white-hot again. A woman in her 50s called the 102nd Precinct Detective Squad to report a crime that had occurred decades earlier. She was an eyewitness to a horrific murder and had carried the secret for more than 40 years. The call was picked up by Queens South homicide detective Eric Contreras, then a young, dedicated 31-year-old detective juggling multiple cases. The details the woman provided sent chills down the detective's spines. She claimed that when she was just 11 years old, she witnessed her mother's boyfriend dismembering a body and burying the parts in the backyard of a Queens home where she had lived in December 1976. Though she couldn't identify the victim, she vividly remembered the details and provided the detectives with an exact location. When asked why she'd stayed silent all these years, she said she feared reprisals but could no longer live with the burden. The mother's boyfriend was identified as Martin Mata, a longtime resident of Jamaica. Mata had owned a barbershop called Haircutter with his brother located on 161st Street in Jamaica, which operated from the late 1970s to the 1980s. In a remarkable twist of fate, the last known location of George Seitz, a frequent patron, was revealed. At the age of 29 in 1976, Mata was present when Seitz mysteriously vanished, shortly before the barbershop ceased operations. On March 12, 2019, investigators executed a search warrant at a residence located at 8772 115th Street in Richmond Hill, Queens, a mere 2.5 miles from the now-defunct barbershop. Following a witness's account, authorities concentrated their efforts on the backyard, which was bordered by a wooden fence. Cadaver dogs pinpointed a specific area, prompting forensic anthropologists to commence excavation. It was not long before they unearthed partial human remains concealed in a makeshift grave beneath a layer of concrete. Only a pelvis and a portion of the torso were retrieved, as the remainder of the body had been dismembered. Investigators from the New York Police Department sought to employ advanced DNA technology for victim identification. However, they encountered a legal hurdle, as New York state law permitted such methods solely for identifying suspects. The Federal Bureau of Investigation stepped in to assist, as federal regulations did not impose similar restrictions. The Queens District Attorney's Office, alongside the New York Police Department and the New York City FBI Office, enlisted the expertise of Othram, an independent laboratory renowned for its proficiency in genetic genealogy and DNA sequencing, to aid in the identification of the remains. Despite the advanced state of decomposition, Othram successfully extracted DNA from the bones and constructed a complete DNA profile, which, unfortunately, did not correspond with any entries in local, state, or national databases. A genealogical investigation revealed that the victims' relatives resided in Ohio and California. Detectives Contreras and Gain promptly traveled to Ohio to engage with the family, who recognized the connection to their long-lost relative. Ultimately, the body was confirmed to be that of George Clarence Sates, thanks to DNA provided by his family, who also shared a poignant photograph of him as a young soldier in uniform. A deeper inquiry uncovered a missing person report for Sates dating back to 1976 within the archives of the New York Police Department. To confirm his identity, an age-progressed image was crafted from a family photograph, which a witness subsequently identified as the man she had seen dismembered by Martin Mata. After more than 4 decades, the family finally received some closure. However, the motive remained elusive. It was speculated that Mata had fatally stabbed Sates and stolen between $7,000 and $8,000, fully aware of his tendency to carry substantial amounts of cash. The investigation traversed 5 states and extended over 2 years. In November 2021, 75-year-old Martin Mata was apprehended at his residence in Jamaica. He faced charges of intentional murder and was arraigned at the Queens County District Attorney's Office. Unfortunately, no further charges could be filed due to the statute of limitations. In October 2022, Mata entered a plea of guilty to manslaughter, and in November, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the 1976 homicide. After 46 long years, Martin Mata was finally brought to justice for his deeds. While this cannot undo the anguish suffered by Sates' family, it is hoped that the identification of the remains and the prosecution of his murderer will provide some solace to his grieving loved ones. "19-year-old Christina Lynn Castiglione resided in the charming community of Redford, Michigan, alongside her parents. In 1983, she proudly graduated from Redford Union High School, where she actively participated in various sports. Although not married, she enjoyed a committed relationship with her boyfriend. Christina was employed as a clerk in the research department of the Detroit Edison Company. On March 21, 1983, her mother reported her missing in Redford Township, located approximately 15 miles west of Detroit. Tragically, 8 days later, on March 29th, the Livingston County Sheriff's Office discovered Christina's lifeless body in the serene Oak Grove State Game Area, a picturesque park in Deerfield Township, Livingston County, following a tip-off. Her remains were found partially clothed in a secluded, wooded area, and detectives uncovered evidence indicating she had been both strangled and assaulted. During the autopsy, the medical examiner identified male DNA, which was meticulously collected and preserved. In the early 2000s, these samples were entered into the combined DNA index system by the Michigan State Police Crime Lab, yet no suspect emerged at that time. In March 2022, the Sheriff's Office sought and obtained grant funding from Season of Justice to pursue advanced DNA testing on the samples collected in 1983. Season of Justice is a distinguished nonprofit organization committed to financing DNA testing for unresolved cold cases. By May 2022, DNA evidence from Christina's case was dispatched to Othram Inc., a private forensic laboratory based in Texas. Utilizing forensic-grade genome sequencing, Othram scientists successfully developed a detailed genealogical profile from the DNA of an unidentified suspect, which yielded significant leads for investigators. This inquiry ultimately led to the identification of Charles David Shaw, whose identity was corroborated through 3 distinct familial DNA comparison tests. Shaw, who resided less than 5 miles from the location of Christina's disappearance, tragically passed away in November 1983 due to accidental asphyxiation. Insights from Shaw's family revealed that he had battled addiction and faced a tumultuous life, grappling with mental health issues and questions of gender identity. Charles Shaw's encounters with law enforcement began early in his life, marked by a series of troubling incidents. In 1981, he faced arrest for the attempted abduction of a woman from the parking lot of a McDonald's in Fowlerville. Earlier, in 1973, the Livonia police apprehended him on charges of breaking and entering. His legal troubles continued in 1977 with a drug possession charge, followed by another arrest in 1982 for stealing women's shoes from a Kmart. Livingston County Sheriff Mike Murphy remarked on the perplexing nature of a recent homicide, stating typically a murder involves some connection between the victim and the perpetrator. However, in this instance, there was none. This lack of leads contributed to the case remaining unresolved for 4 decades. There were no tips, no evidence, and no signs that would have pointed us to Charles Shaw. The meticulous work done in 1983 to preserve evidence and process the crime scene was commendable, reflecting the dedication of both detectives and responding deputies. Sheriff Murphy expressed hope that the surviving family members of Christina Castiglione, along with other victims of unsolved violent crimes, might find closure as advancements in genealogical DNA technology aid law enforcement in their pursuit of justice. Investigators have long suspected a potential link between Christina's case and others, including that of Kimberly Louiselle and 2 siblings from Green Oak Township near South Lyon, Michigan, in the spring of 1982. Kimberly, who was in a relationship with an older gentleman from Redford, contemplated the future of their romance as he prepared to move to Detroit. Despite their concerns about a long-distance relationship, she visited him and his family for a few days, intending to return home on March 20th, 1982. Her boyfriend's brother dropped her off at the intersection of 8 Mile Road and Merriman in Livonia, where she planned to secure a ride for the remainder of her journey. Kimberly encountered an unexpected obstacle during her journey. Despite her efforts to reach out through numerous phone calls in search of a driver, she was unable to connect with anyone. It is possible that the young woman opted to hitchhike, a practice she was familiar with and which remained prevalent in the 1980s. At approximately 6:30 p.m., a familiar face recognized a girl resembling Kimberly, adorned in a faux fur jacket and jeans, in Livonia. This would mark the last confirmed sighting of her. Following this moment, she vanished without a trace. It wasn't until April 14, 1982, that Kimberly's lifeless body was found. She had suffered assault, beating, and strangulation before being discarded in a secluded area along a trail within the Island Lake State Recreation Area in Green Oak Township. Her sister, Cindy Arthurs, who was just 13 at the time of the tragedy, expressed the profound impact of losing Kimberly, a girl who cherished horseback riding, penned poetry, and aspired to become a nurse. Kimberly's case remains under the jurisdiction of the Michigan State Police, with periodic reviews conducted by the Livingston County Sheriff's Office. Nevertheless, Detective Lieutenant Eric Darling has voiced his frustration over the years due to the absence of viable leads. In a separate incident, a 20-year-old woman set out to purchase snacks and beverages from a nearby gas station. She was last seen on September 27, 1981, and her partially clothed body was discovered in a ditch west of M36 just 2 days later. Similar to Christina, it is believed she was murdered elsewhere before her body was unceremoniously left by the roadside.